Lit Ladies.
I'm Christy.
I'm Kelly.
And I'm Carissa.
Three writers and moms exploring how to live out our faith in our literary lives.
We span the country from the coast to the Midwest, and with different stages of life, careers, and favorite genres, we're sure to cover the literary landscape.
In every episode, we'll discuss books we love, reading life, and writing craft, using the Bible as our guide for beauty, goodness, and truth. New episodes drop every other Friday.
Hello and welcome to the Lit Ladies podcast. We are so glad you're joining us again. Today we'll be discussing Moody books, some of which may have a splash of the spooky. Last episode we talked about Christians and horror, so as we discuss books, we'll give the caveat that some of these books may contain content you personally would not prefer to read, or you may have a conviction about. Whether that's language, scary elements, or even more racy scenes, we encourage you to heed those convictions and do your research before picking up a book. These opinions are all based on our experiences, and we may not remember all of the details of a book we discuss. But to start our talk about Moody books in fall, let's talk about fall. Carissa, what state do you live in, and what's the weather like right there now?
I live in Kansas, and it is just like summer. It feels like for half the year. So this week it's supposed to be in the 90s all week.
What's a typical fall like there?
It's pretty much hot until later in October, really. Trees have like maybe turned just a little bit, but everything else just kind of feels like summer. It cools off at night a little bit, but yeah.
Okay, so does it cool off at night in the summertime, or does it just stay hot all day?
No, in the summer it's just hot all the time. But now it's like you can tell it's fall because it's starting to cool off a little bit in the evenings, which is kind of pleasant. But otherwise it's kind of not very moody.
Not very moody yet.
Yeah, not very good for moody books yet.
Now, do you have humidity in Kansas or no?
Yeah, there's some. Yeah, not as dry as like Colorado's, much drier.
Okay.
How about you, Christy? What state are you in, and what's fall like there?
I'm in North Carolina. I'm about 10 minutes from the beach. I'm near the coast. And I would say our fall weather changes daily. Sometimes we'll get like a cool spell, like it'll be in the 60s or 50s when you first wake up. And then it's usually pretty humid and hot by midday. And then it cools off again at night. But I would say most of that starts more like end of October. Like September's still pretty hot and humid.
Yeah, that's interesting. I live on the central coast of California, and humidity aside, our weather is very similar. So our mornings and evenings are really cool. We might be in the 50s or 60s. And then September and October tend to be our warm months. We get up to, we might have a 90-degree day here and there, but we all think it's hot at 80-something degrees. So anyway, it's kind of similar to you. We just don't have the same humidity. Okay, so we're talking about fall books today. So let's paint the scene. Let's say the weather's turned and it's starting to get cozy for you. Where are you reading a book in the fall? What does that look like for each of you?
Usually I'm just on my couch reading. I might have a blanket on me. Usually the dogs are right next to me. My husband's usually watching TV, but if I'm reading, he'll wear headphones. My kids are probably bothering me and trying to tell me about something I needed to sign for school that was due last week. But in this lovely imaginary scene, I am peacefully reading by myself on the couch. Usually I'll be drinking a tea in the cooler months because I like to feel warm, and it curbs me from like late night snacking. And I'll usually drink a black tea because that's just what I have on hand. But I will experiment with local mixes, but I have found that I do not like raspberry tea. It's the main one I don't like. Everything else I'll drink.
That's an interesting and specific tea to not like.
It's
very
too
specific.
tart. I don't like it.
Add some honey.
Well, I am a voracious tea drinker. And so I like, once I stop with my coffee, I will, in the afternoon, I start with tea. I just chain drink tea.
What flavors do you like?
When it gets colder. I'll drink anything. I like all tea except for peppermint. I don't know why. I just don't like it. But yeah, really any like fall flavors, rooibos tea, anything herbal, a little bit fruity. And then I'm drinking that in my ideal scene, and I'm either in bed or on the couch with a fuzzy blanket. And then I also like to watch these YouTube ASMR videos. They're like just scenes. And so you can get one that's like a fall scene, and it'll have like a crackling fire and a rainstorm. And so I can pretend that it's cold outside, and if it's
Netflix
not.
does that with like the fireplace that they play.
Yeah, it's kind
I'll
of
do
like that. Yeah. But you go on YouTube and you can look up like fall ASMR, and it'll just be going for 10 hours.
What does ASMR stand for?
I don't know. It's like sound. It's just like this repetitive sound. Like rain is ASMR. It's like a pleasing sound.
Interesting. And we actually didn't talk about our favorite scenes before we started this podcast. So I did not know that either of you were tea drinkers, but I'm laughing because my current favorite tea right now is peppermint. That's the one I keep going for every night. It's the one that Carissa doesn't like. So that's so funny to me. But I'm just like both of you. I put myself under a cozy blanket, and I think I like holding the warm tea mug as much as I like actually drinking it. But I find that I don't drink tea in the hot months. Like it doesn't really appeal to me when it's warm outside. I don't either. So I like it when it's cold outside. Okay, so I do have a question. Does the season change your preferred genre to read? And if so, how?
Sometimes. I'll say once October hits, I do prefer spookier, moodier reads. I might read a scary story during the summer if it's like a series I've been reading and the next book in the series comes out. I might read it, but it just doesn't have that same like foreboding feeling. And my neighborhood this is total segue. My neighborhood goes all in for Halloween. So it's fun and scary during the early morning runs in the dark because I'll trigger the sensors of everything and they'll all go off.
Oh, no.
And everyone has these like 12-foot skeletons and their eyes like follow you at night. Oh, it's great. I love it.
That's scary.
So, I was going to say, yes, but aside from like fall/Halloween, like seasonal books, I will read Christmas during Christmas. And I can't say that I read Christmas like any other time of year. It's like a good Christmas romance. But those are really the only two seasons, I think, because I don't read like a Valentine romance book at Valentine's. Like I'll read romance any time of the year.
What about you, Carissa?
Pretty much fall is the only time that I'll read a fall kind of spooky, moody book. The rest of the time I'll just read whatever I feel like. Like I don't think I've ever read a Christmas book.
I read Christmas books like candy at Christmas time. I think I'm a complete mood reader. In the summer, I'm all about those beach reads where I just want to be at the beach or a pool. Christmas time, I love the cold holiday vibes. Fall, I like the cozy feeling. So I'm a total mood reader with the seasons.
I might read something set in the winter time.
Okay, like during winter you would?
Yeah.
Okay, what do you all do for Halloween? What did Halloween look like for you this year?
Usually we take the kids and we walk around the neighborhood and we just leave a big giant bowl of candy on our front porch. So it's kind of a, hey, come take a handful and that's it. Some years it's been completely empty and some years we've still had stuff left. And my daughter's 14 this year, so I think she's going to run around the hood with her friend, which would be different from the family outing we usually do.
Ooh.
But my brother doesn't live in a neighborhood. I know, right? My brother doesn't live in a neighborhood. So sometimes he'll come over and he has 4 kids. And then we'll all just trapeze as like a giant group in the neighborhood. So it's usually pretty family friendly.
Oh, it's fun. Yeah, I mean, we haven't really done anything with my daughter yet because she's still a baby, basically. So I guess we'll see what we do this year. She's not really big enough for sweets yet, so probably dress her up though. Sometimes go to like a friend's house and have a potluck. We've done that the past couple years, so it's like family friendly, and everyone still gets to dress up. So, yeah.
Did the adults dress up or just the kids?
Yeah, no, we all dress up.
That's my favorite part about Halloween is the dressing up. Like I love
so
seeing
fun.
everyone's creativity on display. Like phenomenal. I love going to Halloween part. Everything about it. I love it.
Our friends always do like a family costume, and I've always wanted to do that.
Oh, that's fun.
No.
I think of the 3 of us, Christy's jam is Halloween. She's all about Halloween. I love it.
I do.
I have 3 boys. I've got a dragon, an anime character, and an inflatable dinosaur this year. So we're kind of all across the board, and our neighborhood goes all out for trick-or-treating. So that's always fun. We start with pizza at our house, and then we go trick-or-treat. Any friends or family can join us. So that's a fun way to do Halloween. Okay, now that we've talked about what we do in the fall and Halloween, we're going to talk a little bit about fall-themed book recommendations. So we have a full spectrum today from, kind of cozy rom-coms all the way to psychological horror and everything in between. So we'll talk a little bit about those to start. Krystal, do you have one that you want to talk about in that genre?
I have one. It's called The Madwoman Upstairs. So it's set in modern day, but it's kind of a literary mystery, and it's good for if you're a fan of any of the Bronte sisters or if you've read any of their classic books. You will definitely appreciate this book. It's about a young woman who is trying to unravel some clues that someone seems to be leaving her regarding her family legacy or her family heritage because she's a descendant of the Bronte sisters. Actually really hilarious, and has the tone is super funny. Yeah, much lighter, but if you're kind of craving a little bit of that classic Gothic horror, sort of, not Gothic horror, I would say, but just that classic Gothic influence, but you want something a little lighter, I would definitely recommend this book. You laugh the whole time, but as you go through, you realize you're contemplating all these literary questions about authorship and inspiration and things like that the Bronte sisters were contemplating. So if you're a fan, it's got lots of little Easter eggs in there, and it's really cute. And there's a little romance, and yeah, it's really good.
All right. I'm putting that on my TBR. I want to talk a little bit about these fall-themed books. I actually read them last year. It was called the Sweater Weather series. Super lighthearted rom-coms. And I think it was 7 of them total, and one different author in the whole set. So I think that's called an anthology. But the 2 I want to talk about, one was by Courtney Walsh, and that one was called Can't Help Falling, and it's a brother's best friend. And I am a sucker for brother's best friend romances. I don't know why. I have a little brother so much younger than me. I never had an older brother, so it's not even pertaining to my real life, but I really liked that one. And then the other one I liked was the Just Don't Fall by Emma St. Clair. And I just love everything Emma St. Clair writes. Right now she's done some hockey books, and then she did this whole cliche series, and she's light, she's clean, she's funny, and it's just a happy, swoony romance. So if you want those escape feels with a little bit of a fall theme, I would absolutely recommend those Sweater Weather series. Okay, so if our listeners can't tell by now, I am not a huge fan of the creepy horror books, so I tend to be on the lighter side of things. But I am reading Jamie Jo Wright's Echoes Among the Stones right now, and it's keeping me guessing. And I love her moody descriptions. She's kind of got a split time period in that too, which is fun. I'm getting the 40s and the present day, so I'll have to see how it happens. There's a lot of cemetery talk and whatnot going on around graveyards. So Christy's read more Jamie Jo Wright, though. You may have some thoughts on those.
I think I've read all of her books, and actually I just got the Spectres in the Glass House. I think that's the title of the one that just released. But my friend down the street borrowed it, so I haven't even read it yet. She borrowed it first.
You're a good friend like that.
Yes, I am.
I love the cover of that one. It's so pretty. It just makes me want to read it based on the color on the cover.
But I would label her as a Gothic, but you're right. She's Gothic, and then she has a time slip, and she has the mystery, and she has the romance. So it's kind of like your complete package. Mm-hmm. And they definitely tend toward the dark and chilling. But she, like I said, she adds some romance in there. And it's funny because sometimes I'll read time slips and I'll always either the past or the present better. But she does a pretty good job of balancing them out. That I like both of them. And for people who want kind of a ghostly intrigue but don't want a scary ghost, I think she'd be a good starting point to dip your toes. So, Kelly, you picked a good author to dip your toes in the spooky-ish world. Someone else to think of is Ted Dekker. He writes Christian horror. He also writes thriller and fantasy. And I read one of his, it was something about bones. I don't remember the full title. It's been years ago. And that was more of a thriller with like a serial killer vibe. And then Frank Peretti's Monster is kind of a Bigfoot, but that's also like your thriller horror-ish. And that was a really good book.
Well,
and when I was researching, oh, you want to say something, Krystal?
No, this is what I was going to bring up. No, keep going.
Oh, you
sorry. The book I co-wrote. I got too excited.
Yes, I was researching it, and then I realized, there's one called House that's written by both Frank Peretti and Ted Dekker. So now I was like, have you read it? I really want to read it.
Yeah, I remember, and I was a teenager, but I remember being like, my two favorite authors co-wrote a book. Like, this one only, this is so a dream come true.
Carissa, weren't they the authors that kind of brought you into Christian fiction? I think that's what you referenced before.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I read others, but they were the ones I would read like everything I could get my hands on by them. And it was more my speed than like, I'd read the occasional like historical romance or something like that. But definitely, I liked it. Two couples get like trapped in this house in like a storm. And then there's like something that's after them. This is literally just from my memory.
I was like, don't spoil it.
That's it. That was all I remember. It's just like something bad's happening in this house and they can't get out for whatever reason.
And don't you love how weather always enhances the mood in a story? You can always tell.
You do. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And I feel like there's always that element of isolation. Yes. We did not talk about that in our horror episode, but there's snowstorm or an island or some storm has knocked out power. So that always makes it good. Someone else for the general market I really enjoy reading is Darcy Coates, and I've read most of her books. She has a bunch with houses on the covers, and they're cleanish. There's very little swearing or gore, and it's closed door, if any. She does have some longer books that are heavier on the gore, so make sure you do your research on what's in there. But she has unique taste with ghosts because sometimes the ghost who you think is a villain, like, actually isn't the villain. It's like a human, and the person who was scared of the ghost initially has to realize that the ghost is a friend, not a foe, and they have to kind of like work together. It's really twisty. I really like her book.
Okay, so moving along in our moodiness, scariness spectrum, we'll talk a little bit about moody books, but not overtly scary books. Carissa, what would you recommend?
I really like Bone Gap by Laura Ruby. This is actually one of my favorite books of all time. I've reread it probably like 3 times. Definitely not really spooky at all. So this is still good if you are not really wanting anything that's going to terrify you, but something that's maybe more of a fall mood, something that's got a little bit of intrigue in it. It's young adult as well. So I think to my memory, it's pretty clean. So it's basically just about these 2 brothers in a rural Midwestern town. One of their friends, she ends up disappearing, but she was kind of transient, and so no one believes the main character, the young man, that he saw someone take her. Can't describe this guy, and so no one believes him. They're like, she just ran away, she's on her own, and so he's trying to convince people to try to find her, basically. But it's also like the relationship between the brothers, and it flashes back to the relationship with this friend, and then it's kind of got this magical realism to it as well. So something that's kind of not really explained, but it's just there, and also flashes back with this character as well. So you kind of see what's happening with her.
And don't give spoilers because I'm partway through.
That's it. Okay, I thought you said that you started it. So what do you think so far without giving spoilers?
So far, it's great. And I actually like that they give her perspective because it makes me want to know, why is she where she is? So it's great.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see what happens.
Yeah.
And it's
now
easy
you
reading.
Just dropped this like breadcrumb of intrigues. And now I'm like, wait, what is this? Like, I'm going to check this book out now.
Yes. So that is Bone Gap by Laura Ruby. And I know you have more, Carissa, so what else?
I do. I have so many more. Okay. Another one of my favorites by Laura Ruby, so the same author. So it's a long title. It's called 13 Doorways, Wolves Behind Them All. It was a finalist for the National Book Award, or it won, actually. So this is also young adult. It is a time slip between this girl and a ghost. So one is living in like the early 1900s, and the other one is in the 40s, kind of right towards the end of World War II. And I don't really want to give any more away than that. Also, magical realism has a ghost in there, so it's a little bit more of that kind of spooky. I mean, it's not really spooky, it's more moody, but if you're wanting the ghost kind of Halloween-y vibe, you can
check
do
it
that
out.
one.
Yes,
yeah.
Sounds good.
Another one I really like, also YA, is Small Favors by Erin A. Craig. And so I would actually recommend basically anything by her, a little more like gothic fantasy. But this one is a little bit lighter still. It takes place in, I want to say like a fictional world, but it really just feels like our world. It's kind of like almost like Little House on the Prairie, like kind of just feels like out west, small community. There are some strange things going on and some kind of folk tales involved in it. A little bit of a mystery, a little bit of intrigue if you just kind of don't know who to trust. Slightly magical realism elements in there, but definitely a lot lighter. It's not really scary at all. And then my last young adult one, I don't know why these are all young adult, but it's House of Hollow by Krystal Sutherland. This is a story about three sisters, triplets, I think. Are they triplets? They're three sisters, and one of them disappears. So we've got kind of a theme here of like disappearing people. It's also magical realism. And oh man, this one, like I would say, I almost don't even want to say anything. Just read the first page and you will be totally hooked. There's just some weird things about where these sisters and so they have to band together to find the one that's missing. So it's got the mystery element as well.
And this one, the cover has the girl's face with the flowers all over it, right?
Yes.
Okay, because
yes.
you told me to read that one, and it's been on my list, and I'll have to bump it up now.
Yes.
Okay, so what book was that one?
Yeah. House of Hollow.
House of Hollow, Krystal Sutherland.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Krista, do you like magical realism?
Yes,
Sounds
it's
like
my
it.
favorite.
I'm just teasing you. I love that she keeps saying, and this is magical realism.
I feel like, and I know a lot of people define it differently. So basically how I would define it is that it's set in it is set in the real world. And there's usually just like one or two things that are slightly like they would be speculative elements, something that wouldn't really happen in real life. It's not necessarily explained. It's not a whole fantasy world. There's not like, oh, well, this is the source of the magic. It's never really explained. It's just kind of there, but it might play an important part in the story. So like a good example would be kind of that movie with Johnny Depp, Chocolat.
Yes.
That's almost magical realism because like she makes the chocolate, whatever chocolate she makes for that person, like fixes their problem, but it's specific for them. Like it really helps. There's that question of like, is it actually her, the chocolate, or is it them? But stuff like that. That's magical realism.
Which I think that was based off of a book, wasn't it? I think I read that book.
Oh, maybe.
I think I did in high school. So,
I love that movie.
Myself. Yes. Okay. And then did you have recommendations in this lane that were maybe not young adult, but along the Moody vein?
So I think Christy's read maybe some of these, but I love the Chief Inspector Gamache series by Louise Penny. And they're just these mysteries. It's set around the same central cast. And the main character is this Inspector Gamache. And they're set kind of close to where my mom is from in Canada. And so for me, they feel very cozy. Some of them are set in the fall as well, but they're mysteries, but they have a sort of like, so some of them go a little bit dark and deal with deeper themes and really make you think. But at the same time, it has this kind of cozy element. I was reading that Louise Penny would not call these cozy mysteries, which is kind of interesting. But at the same time, there is sort of a cozy element just with these characters that return every time. And they kind of have their own humor and things like that. So I love them.
Wait, yeah. What would Louise Penny call them?
Just mysteries.
Just mysteries.
She says, okay. Yeah, in an interview, she said they wouldn't be cozy. I think cozy is a little more formulaic, maybe.
Oh, okay.
But hers, like Louise Penny, you'll be listening and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm almost halfway through the book. Where's the body? You're like building up to who is going to get murdered is the question. Like, it's just, they're not all the same.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
They are good. I think I read like the 13th book, and then I was like, there's such familiarity between these characters. And my friend who recommends books was like, yeah, that's the 13th one. You have to go back and read all of them. And I was like, oh my gosh. So I went back and read, I think I read 1 through 6, and then I got distracted with something else. But the environment is so rich and the characters are just so well developed, especially if we stick with a series that long. Like, you really get to know them. As far as calling it a cozy, though, it is one of those things you could argue, because there's not a lot of like gruesome details.
No.
You know,
It's
and
psychological.
Yeah.
It's all about the people and the relationships and people's motivations, who people really are underneath.
And it's so funny because it's a small town, so you think you know everybody so well by like book 5, but then somebody still manages to surprise you.
So you don't have to read them in order then, or would you recommend reading them in order?
I would recommend reading them in order, but they are standalones. But you would get a fuller picture if you read them all. But there's a lot, so.
But sometimes, like, something happens in the previous book with like the Sûreté du Québec. That's like the sort of the police force, and then you're going to be a little bit confused if they reference those. So I would just do it in order. It's so worth it.
Which is a great point. So many authors have big backlists, so it's always fun to go back and read backlists. So this one's a great option. You could read so many books.
I'm like trying to save them because I'm afraid I'm reading them too fast. I'm going to catch up with her. So I have one more that is clean with light faith elements. And this is an indie book, and it's called Vale by Tess Bentley. So this is good if you appreciate kind of that classic 19th century Gothic or very light Gothic. This woman gets transported back in time. So a little bit of like that Outlander vibe, but that's kind of the only similarity, really. She gets transported back in time. I think she's like in her 30s or something with 2 kids, you know. She gets transported, and all of a sudden she's 18 again, and she's in these people's estate. And this guy has like transported her back. And so he's kind of the villain. This happens in the very first scene of the book. And then it's kind of all about like, how is she going to get back? How is she going to adjust to the past? So definitely, if you're a fan of Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights, you would appreciate that book a lot. A lot of homages to those classic books.
I love all of your knowledge of the classic books. And so you can spot the combination of, you know, modern day and classic together. So are there any classics that have, you know, a Gothic horror element to them that you'd recommend?
I would say I can't go an episode maybe without talking about Jane Eyre, but definitely another one of my favorite books of all time. And Jane Eyre is going to be good if you're still wanting that sort of very light, kind of moody fall sense. Oh, most people probably know the story, but it's so good.
I read Jane Eyre a long time ago. What is it that makes it Gothic? What part of it? Because I don't remember it standing out.
Jane Eyre, I feel like it's like a quieter sort of novel. Like, it's got this romance in it and these beautiful descriptions, but it's kind of melancholy. Like, Jane is such a sad, she's had a lot of bad things happen to her. But she's so strong through all of it. And honestly, like, her faith is very genuine. And because I think Charlotte Bronte's faith was very genuine. And that comes out in the story. And yeah, it's just kind of how she deals with it. And it's because, so what makes it Gothic, I think, is the house. You always have the element of like the big house that's almost like a character in itself.
Okay.
And while she's at the house, there's like weird things that are going on. So that's all I'll say about that. But there is sort of this weird kind of mystery element. And then also there's always like this male character. He might be a love interest. He might be a villain who's kind of brooding, kind of like Rochester.
Interesting.
I also like Rebecca. So this is by Daphne du Maurier. It was written in the 30s, similar to Jane Eyre, actually. So it has some of those Gothic elements. So a young woman ends up marrying this guy and being part of this big estate. He's kind of an older man. The house is kind of like a character. She's haunted by the dead wife's memory. And it's beautifully written. Oh my gosh, like the prose in it, if you love reading like beautiful, moody prose, it's so beautiful. It's kind of a mystery too.
I was going to say, whenever Carissa talked about Rebecca in the house being a character, it did remind me of Starling House by Alix E. Harrow.
Oh, you've read that one
Doesn't
too.
It? Yes,
Yeah.
I read
Oh,
that
yeah.
one because you told me to.
Well, Starling House, that brings us right to our next category, which is horror elements, but it's mixed with other genres. So one of mine for this is really anything by Neil Gaiman, but I was kind of thinking Neverwhere is the first one that comes to my mind. He's definitely not horror in my opinion. He's fantasy. But his are a little bit darker and they might have some horror elements, some creatures that are a little bit horror-esque. So that'd be my pick for that one. Fantasy, but sort of a little bit horror. And then Christy, did you have a question about that one?
Well, I don't know if it's a dumb question or not, to be honest. I was
There
going
are
to say
no dumb questions.
In my head, Neil Gaiman is someone who writes in like Old English, and I just feel like his books would be hard to read. But then you always talk about him, but I know you like classical books. So I'm like, is Neil Gaiman someone that's like reader friendly for like / beach reader, easy reader? Or is he more like...
He's modern.
I know, I think I just didn't think he was modern. I don't know why I had that in my head.
I mean, he's still alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think that's a dumb question.
Thanks.
You should start with Ocean at the End of the Lane, Christy. It's so
Maybe I'll
short.
start there.
That's a really good one to start with too if you're not sure about fantasy. It's like very, very short, but creepy.
Okay.
That's always my Neil Gaiman starter book that I suggest for people.
Ocean at the End of the Lane.
Mm-hmm. And then my only other one, really anything, also by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. Specifically, I'm thinking of Silver Nitrate. Certain Dark Things is sort of vampires. It sounds a little weird, but I really like the way she mixes genres, horror elements, fantasy. I love all her unconventional characters. It's so great.
Don't you just love authors' minds like that who can put all of these components together and make a compelling story out of them?
Yeah, she's so unique. Have you read anything by her, Christy?
I did read Silver Nitrate because you told me to.
Oh, yeah.
See, I take book rec seriously. I read these things you tell me to read.
What did you think of Silver Nitrate?
I liked it, but you like books that are more descriptive. So where I'm like, just get to the point, you enjoy reading all that. And I just want to know what happens.
Yeah.
The prose.
That's
You like
true,
the
that
prose, Krista?
I do. Give me a good sentence.
It's the English teacher in you.
Yeah, it really is.
It is.
Christy, did you have some more?
I did. I really like Simone St. James, and I forgot how I even stumbled across her, but I've literally read everything that she's written. And she's got some really good ghost elements in her too. And it's almost like the Darcy Coates one where the ghost isn't always the bad thing or whatever. And usually hers is like solving a mystery or something like that with it. But my favorite one is the Sundown Motel.
That's my favorite too, like by far.
That was a really good, like moody one. I don't love the way it ended, components of the way it ended, which obviously I won't get into. And then one of my favorites from Darcy Coates is Gallows Hill. She's the one that has the houses on her cover. This one has family secrets. It's a winery. It's like got this crazy creepy factor it's just written so well. And this is the one time, Chris, you can appreciate that it's written very descriptively. And it just leaves you like, wow, like the whole vibe and the whole scenery of what she has to go through. Like, it's really interesting.
Maybe I'll start with that one. She's been on my list since you like her.
You should. And I think the ones with the houses, most of the ones I read in my Kindle, so I don't really have a concept of like how thick they are, but I feel like the ones with the houses are shorter reads than some of her other ones. And then moving on to another spooky read. I won't say what book it is because I will give away part of the book. So I can't tell you.
What?
I can't tell you it. It's several years old, so it's nothing that's like brand new.
How are we?
But it was one of those things. Wait, just wait. Okay, I'm telling you the concept. I'm not telling you the story. So in the first part of the book, okay, you all seen The Holiday, right? Kate Winslet.
Yeah,
come on.
But I've heard of it.
I know Kelly has.
I have.
Okay, so basically, they switch houses. So it's like, one of them's in, I don't know, England somewhere, and they switch to LA. It's the same concept for this book. So this girl's having trouble. She switches houses with her male cousin, so apartment. So he goes to her place. She goes to his place to stay for a little bit. And while she's there, his neighbor is murdered. And so the cops are like questioning her, they're questioning her about him, who, conveniently left at this period. And so it's kind of like about that. And then you go to the second half of the book and you meet the villain, and the villain's almost like repeating it from the beginning of the story, but you realize that he's in the apartment with her. He's under the bed. He's in the closet. So it's almost like you took that journey with her in the first half of the book because you were reading and you had no idea he's right there. And now, like, you're reading the second half of the book and you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know he was there. So it's super creepy. I still think about that book to this day.
I think that is actually my worst fear. The person is in the house. Oh,
so you have dogs, though. Get a dog, because my dogs would never let someone else be in my house.
Oh. Well, now someone's going to be reading this book and they're going to be like, wait.
We've heard this.
See, that's why I didn't say anything. So, yes.
And I'm getting ready to tease you because I'm like, let's do a book rec episode, but not tell our listeners any of the names of the books.
Maybe this can be our poll question. It'll be like,
Yeah.
Can you guess the book?
That's sweet. Well, I didn't want to ruin it because that would be a pretty big ruin. But I just remember the way that book, I read this years ago and it still has stuck with me, like just that creepiness factor.
And the twist, that's what makes the difference, right? The twist. And this is a side note and just a tangent, and we do not have to keep this in here. But as you're talking, I'm like, I might think you need to go back to writing horror because you like all of this stuff so much.
No. I do, but I think I like whatever I'm reading. Like when we talk about romance, I'll be all into romance. So it just depends. I'm into whatever I'm into at the moment.
All right. Fair enough. All right. Let's move on to talk about some classics. I know there are some classics that have some of these themes. Carissa, why don't you start us off?
So for classics, started with Dracula. So I should say, for these classics, I think this would also be good for people who are wanting maybe a little bit scarier, but not any objectionable content. Because, most of them are written in the 19th century. So pretty strong, moral code. So that's also a perk too. I think we talked about Frankenstein a little bit last time. Dracula, Frankenstein, very influential in the genre. Dracula is actually epistolary, so it's just letters back and forth, which is kind of surprising too. Jekyll and Hyde. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, very classic sort of mad scientist story. I think that's kind of where the trope began, honestly, like the mad scientist. He experiments on himself to disastrous consequences. Anything by Edgar Allan Poe. That's nice because he does poetry and short stories. So something in a single sitting. I was actually just reading that he kind of revolutionized the idea of the short story just all across English literature. He had this theory of it, so that's kind of cool as well. It has to be read in a single sitting, and you just a full experience all at once. Another short story that is good is The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Really fascinating story about a young mom who, from our perspective, we can tell she's probably suffering from postpartum depression. Mm-hmm. But of course, in 1915, her doctor husband does not understand that and prescribes a rest cure for her where she just sits in a room and does nothing all day.
Wow.
So you can see how horrifically that ends up there with that story. And also, if you're moving into 20th century, I'd say anything by Shirley Jackson. Christy, have you read Haunting of Hill House or anything by her?
I've seen the movie a long time ago, but I haven't read the book.
I know. I think I started watching the show and I was like, is this the same story or...
I feel like with shows, they start off with the premise and then it kind of just segues into whatever.
I couldn't really see it being like that. I was like, well, it's a haunted house. But yeah, definitely really classic. I think she really brought the haunted house trope to the forefront as far as I know. Do you have any more scary ones, Christy? On the scarier end?
I was trying to think because when you said haunted house, it made me think of settings. And for horror, I think some of my favorite settings are horror houses with that family or some kind of history of something that happened in the house that carries over to the present time. And Stephen King had one, and I can't remember the name of it now, but it was a carnival, this, high school kid, whatever, worked at the carnival, and it was a murder. I don't think that was really horror, but I love something that's like a fairground carnival because I think that's just such a ripe place for horror.
And that is the thing that creeps me out, and I would hate those.
Like the clowns, the mirror,
Yes.
the fun
Yeah,
house.
the
noise.
fun house.
True.
The fun house is what gets you.
So much ripe potential there. You're right. A setting. We need to talk about at some point, like maybe next Halloween, talk about horror tropes, because I think setting plays such a huge role in that. That's a great point.
We could have a whole episode just on settings and various tropes.
Yes.
Romance.
Oh,
I mean,
for
everything.
sure. Ooh, I like that. Another idea for the books.
I do like that.
I'm going to write it down.
Modern and a bit scarier. I think we already talked about Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. So it's set in the 50s in Mexico. It's got some of those classic Gothic elements with the house. A few homages to the yellow wallpaper, if you end up reading that first. T. Kingfisher has some good ones. My favorite would be probably The Hollow Places. I don't even know what genre of horror to call it. I mean, it's not ghosts. There's not really gore. It's kind of like a mystery. The narrator in this one and the narrator in House with Good Bones is so funny. Like, I was laughing out loud for like half the book. Really cool. And then one I read this summer is How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. Have you read any of?
That sounds like an interesting concept. I haven't even heard of it.
Have you read of any of those? Heard of those authors? Grady Hendrix, T. Kingfisher.
I've heard of Teen Kingfisher, and I think you mentioned before that it was like a funny book, or maybe it was a marker you were talking to me about. So I'll have to look into that one too.
My first book by Grady Hendrix. So I don't really know anything about him, but it was good. Definitely make you, if you were ever in your church's puppet ministry, you will never look at it the same again.
Oh my goodness.
I was in my puppet ministry. I was in my puppet ministry, so...
There must be a vacation Bible school.
My best friend was in the puppet ministry, and I'm ashamed to say I make fun of her for that a fair amount.
I was a kid.
Well, now you'll have to read this.
Yeah, it's pretty scary, I would say.
Oh, now I'm definitely going to read it.
It's not funny. It sounds like a comedy almost, but it's a scary book.
No, it's scary. What is it about, like, humanoid things that look human but are not human? It just is dolls.
Well, if you
like,
think about it,
clowns.
It's what you were saying for a horror episode, when things are normal but just off kilter a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that's where the horror comes in. Yep. It's like you're thinking, and I was telling Carissa the other day, I watched this movie, and I'm not going to tell you the name of it, but it was exactly everything Carissa had talked about, as far as like this couple met this other couple and they were hanging out. They didn't know them, but they thought they were normal. And it's like there's this series of things that happens. And every time the wife is like, I think we need to leave. It's weird. I think we need to go. And the husband's like, you're overreacting. It's fine. Everyone's different. You know, guess what? She was right.
She was right.
Totally right.
Always listen to the wife.
Yes. But it was like that, like these little things that were just off and that she picked up on, and he just explained it away. And it did not end well for some people. That's all I'm going to say about it.
Let's see. Do we have any others in this category? I would say for psychological, I guess I'm going to call it psychological. The whole book is kind of like stream of consciousness, if you like that. It's called I'm Thinking of Ending Things. I don't know what it was about this book. I think it's only like 4 hours long on the audio, but I could not stop listening. And like, it just had me guessing. And it was like that same thing Christy was just talking about. It's like, just a little off. And I was like, what is going to happen? I know it's a movie, and I've heard the movie is not quite the same. So I wouldn't necessarily judge it by the movie, but.
And real quick, before you keep going, how would you define like psychological? What is different from a, psychological thriller from a regular horror book?
I don't know. Christy, do you have any thoughts about that? I'm not sure how I would.
I was going to think of one. There's Stephen King book, and it still blows my mind to this day, because almost the entirety of the book, in the very beginning, it's a husband and a wife. And then the rest of the book, you were pretty much in her mind. And I'm just like, how can he write so much about being in someone's mind? I mean, there were some flashbacks that, they had dialogue and stuff, but it's just one of those things that just really gets into your mind, I feel like. Like, horror, I think, causes you that anxiety and that dread, but the psychological makes you doubt things you think you know.
Okay, that's a great differentiation.
I think the unreliable narrator is a factor, or just can be. I feel like I've seen more psychological thrillers than really read them. But yeah, I think just what is the inner workings of somebody's mind. That reminds me, a classic I didn't mention is Turn of the Screw by Henry James. And that's definitely psychological. Is what's happening really what's happening in real life. Yeah.
In your mind. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. I feel like we should mention Stephen King because he's just such an amazing writer, but he's not for the faint of heart. I think I've started 3 Stephen King books, or I've started 4 and finished 1.
Wow. I read a couple.
Yeah. Pet Sematary was just too scary for me. It was too scary.
Exercise trainer reads Stephen King, so he gives me the play-by-play of all the books. So I feel like I've read them all without having to read them all. So
that's funny.
Well, that's handy.
Yeah. Actually,
I don't version.
My own Pet Cemetery too. My son came to me a couple years ago and he goes, "Mommy, look, I found a dinosaur." And I looked at it. I'm like, "Babe, that's not a dinosaur. It was a dog head, like that he had excavated in our backyard in this area that was sand." So then apparently the previous owners had put this dog in there. So then my husband was going to clean up the yard one day and I saw this blanket, and I have all boys. It was a pink blanket. I'm like, "Joseph, you should probably look at that because I don't know what it is." And it was another dog wrapped up. So I joke that I have my own.
I got goosebumps right now.
I know.
Thinking about that book.
Yeah, just wait though.
No, I totally get it. I keep thinking about that book, Pet Sematary, and I didn't even finish the book.
I never read that one.
I would like you all to know that area is now covered and nobody plays in it anymore because I don't know what else is up there.
Dog ghosts.
Oh man, Stephen King he's so skillful though. Like the other book I read was just a mystery, but the way he got into like the villain's head, I mean, wow. Like I think it takes some dedication to your craft to really be able to portray that well. So for good or ill,
very good. I used to travel for work, and I, unlike Carissa, am not an audiobook person, but I was at that point because I was driving a lot between patient houses. And it was a book of his, and it wasn't really a horror, I don't think, but it was definitely a thriller. And it was almost like a chase thing constantly. And like, I didn't want to get out of the car to see my patient because I was like, I want to finish this book. So maybe that's why I don't read audiobooks, because I have a hard time turning it off, whereas it's easier for me to close a book. Maybe that's it.
He writes other genres too, other than just horror. So good to check out if you don't want to do the horror. He's got other books, but...
And now I have a question because I have a middle schooler. So what are some middle grade scary books?
I have a couple here. Something funny is that I've noticed is that kids love horror. I mean, I had a 6th grade reading class at the time, and I was like, we just need to enjoy reading and just know that reading is fun and just get through a full book together. So I was going to do a read aloud, and I put all these books out, really, really good ones I thought they might like, and they all picked Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman, hands down, like unanimous. So it's sort of a retelling of The Jungle Book in a way, but it's about a boy who's raised in the graveyard and he's raised by ghosts. So like each chapter is a little adventure, but he's got like kind of this looming character entity that's after him kind of throughout the book. It keeps getting closer and closer, similar to The Jungle Book. But that's one they really liked it. Coraline, also by Neil Gaiman, is really good. Gallant by V.E. Schwab. Kind of gothic, kind of Secret Garden, but gothic. And then I haven't read this series, but I think it's called City of Ghosts. And she's got a couple in the series now, but it's middle grade and it's also by V.E. Schwab. And then, have you heard of any of those, Christy?
I read Gallant because her writing is beautiful. Coraline, I know it's the movie with like the button eyes, and that just freaks me out. So I haven't read that one. Night Books, I think is on Netflix now, but I bought my daughter the first book, and I think she read it, but I haven't read it.
It's like, I couldn't stop listening. I was vacuuming and I was like, what else can I vacuum? Because I need to know what happens here. It's like a little bit Hansel and Gretel, but with this kid.
Like fairy tale.
Yeah, with this kid who writes horror stories, and they get trapped in an apartment instead of like the witch's house. It's a witch's apartment. That's all I really want to say about it. But it's just, wow. I was like, this is for kids. This is so good. Like, I didn't think it was too scary at all, but it was just so well done.
And I have one that I can add. It's middle grade. It's The Clackety by Laura Smith, S-E-N-F, Sniff. I don't know how to say her name. It's about a girl who enters this other world to rescue her aunt, but then she's pursued by all sorts of like scary beasts, and there's like a serial killer that's kind of after her.
Oh, wow.
And there's a bunch of like houses or something. It's been a couple years since I've read it. And it's almost like she needs something from each house in order to continue her journey. But then he's also coming after her. So it's like some houses he's in the same house as her, I think. And then some houses it's like she's leaving and he is right behind her on her heels. And there's more books in that series. I've only read the first one. And I know as a kid, I read tons of R.L. Stein.
Me too, I think. I'm pretty sure I did.
I think he had another series back then.
I think I read all the Goosebumps books, or several of them.
Well, did you ever read the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark? It always had like the creepy sketch cover on it.
I don't think so, but I've heard of it.
They're almost like your retellings of like campfire tales kind of thing.
Ooh.
But I remember reading that as a kid.
I think I read some R.L. Stein, some of those short stories. Maybe that really started my love of horror.
All right, so now I'm going to have to go in the show notes and I'm going to have to look at all these books to add to my TBR.
I do too. I need to add that last one especially. So thank you for joining us today for Lit Ladies. Don't forget to rate and review on your podcast platform and follow us on Instagram at Lit Ladies Pod. And thank you for joining us on our literary journey. We will end with a quote from J.R.R. Tolkien. He found himself wondering at times, especially in the autumn, about the wild lands, and strange visions of mountains that he had never seen came into his dreams.